So I want to do a little bit of the history of our reading this morning, because our story might be familiar to a lot of us. But it takes us on a journey with these three men who probably were astrologers, and they may have come from Babylonia or even Egypt. And they were doing what astrologers did, and they noticed an important sign that came in the form of a star. And in the ancient world, the occurrence of a star or constellation of stars was often associated with the birth of a notable person. So having seen the star, they followed it. And it shouldn't surprise any of us that Herod, who was the ruler at the time, is not pleased with what he's hearing. And it seems like it's an inescapable spiritual truth that when tender grace bursts upon the scene, the harsh forces of selfishness fight against that grace. And so, like a roach that's scurrying for a dark place when the light is turned on, Herod frantically plots to destroy who he believes is going to threaten his throne. His plan is to have the Magi come and tell him where they find this threat, this baby's birth that was signified by a star. So when the Magi leave Herod, who is the threatened one, and they follow the star, they continue to follow it until it stops over a place where the child was. And Matthew emphasizes that when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And this is where I want to spend some time this morning digging around that word joy. Because I would bet that when the Magi experienced that joy, that there was also a moment where they were struck by the contrast of how they felt in that secret meeting with Herod. The experience of joy and remembering that experience of secret and deceit. The joy they felt when the star stopped was that inner confirmation that they had arrived at the place where they were supposed to be. And any time we experience that kind of deep joy, it is such a gift. It's a gift for any of us to have. Those moments where we know that we are exactly where we are meant to be. Can you recall a moment in your own life, a moment when maybe you felt so at home in your own skin and so at one with yourself and everything that you knew the place at which you had arrived as the place where you belong? A moment when you can say, this is me. This is why I'm alive. This is who I am. This is where I am meant to be. A moment when the star that you've been following stops and you find yourself overwhelmed with joy. That joy that comes with being comfortable in your own skin. That's a moment that I certainly wish for all of us, but even more so, I do believe that God wishes these moments for all of us, because in those moments, we can also recognize God. That kind of joy happens when, like the Magi, we find ourselves at the place where we can freely and truly be who we are. Do you know where that place of joy is for you? I loved that Kim shared even about the promises and that realization of experiencing those promises. But if you're not there yet, I believe that recovery helps us find that place of joy. And we also all know that our lives are often not characterized by such joy. Our lives often reflect something other than the experience of being overwhelmed with joy. So why do we find ourselves living without that sense of joy? Well, I think there's lots of people, and probably lots of us in this room, including me at times, who find themselves living out of something other than the true self that God has given all of us as a gift. And any time we live out of something other than the self that God has given us, we are living beside ourselves. And there is no joy in that. we feel a separation from ourselves and we feel a separation from God. And we all know that this disease of addiction causes loss of joy for anyone who is impacted by it. Addiction robs us of joy whether we are the person struggling with addiction or whether we are the loved one watching someone we love struggle with addiction. But recovery helps bring back that sense of self and helps us to find those moments of joy in life. And joy comes when we live from the inner self that is of God and not from the outer expectations that come from the world. So I want to share an example that I think many people are following stars that deep down they know will never come to stop at any place that they could ever call home. But they try to follow them anyway. And many in our culture are in a frantic and feverish pace to have all the things that our culture says will bring success and happiness. But even after getting all of that, there is still a sense of emptiness. And there's still that sense that there has to be more. We can hear it, or maybe we've even said it to ourselves, that I'm not happy. I'm not happy with this job. I'm not happy in this relationship. I'm not happy at this school, whatever it may be. You can hear people talk about feeling like they're a rat just running on a wheel. But then comes, but I have a mortgage, or I have rent, or I have bills. I'm up to my ears in debt, so I have to keep doing this. Well, there's no joy in that, because that's living from the world's outer expectations and not from that inner self that's connected to God. And some of us never have such experiences of joy because we live under the burden of the expectations that others have of us, which keeps us from being able to align with our true selves. For them, it may be that I feel like I'm living for everybody else and I've lost my way. I don't know who I am because I'm taking care of everyone else. And so lots of people live lives of fragmentation because they try to find their center in everyone else rather than within themselves. Or they're trying to find themselves through drugs and alcohol and find that it just becomes more and more numb and they can't find their true selves. Well, our Magi friends were overwhelmed with joy because they realized and they recognized that they had arrived at the place where they were meant to be, the place where they were most themselves, the place where they could say they were at home. They had arrived at the place where the divine and the human meet. And the joy that they experienced, that joy within, confirmed that. But even in the midst of that joy, they had a decision that they needed to make. As soon as they stopped and took a minute in all of that joy, they also remembered that secret meeting that they had had with Herod. And they knew that they had to decide what they would do with what he had asked. And at that moment, they were caught in between their joy and their fear. And I'm going to guess that all of us in here know what it's like to be caught between our joy and our fear. Those moments where this life in recovery, it feels pretty good, and you're starting to see the benefits. You're starting to have those experiences that people talk about. And then bam, some consequence from what has happened in addiction rears its ugly head, and it has to be dealt with. Abraham Maslow wrote that every human being has both sets of forces within. One set clings to safety and defensiveness, hanging on to the past and moving in a backward direction, afraid to grow, afraid to take chances, afraid of freedom. The other set of forces impels one forward towards wholeness and uniqueness of self, towards confidence in the face of the world. And so the Magi, just like every one of us in here, had a decision to make. And I kind of like to think of it that they took a third step in this moment. and they turned their lives and will over to God's care even in the midst of their fear. They had to make a decision on whether they were going to choose the joy they experienced or choose their fear. They had to choose between the delight and joy of one and the anxiety and fear of the other. And I think in that is where they mirror what is true for all of us. Those times when we're afraid to grow, and at the same time we're afraid not to grow. But the Magi refused to go in the direction of their fears. And through the language of their dreams, they were warned to go home by another way. So they chose life, and they chose growth, and to continue to follow that joy. They trusted their own inner experience of joy, even if that experience flew in the face of the power and authority and expectations of the world. And they went in the direction of the divine, because that inner joy is worth trusting and worth following and worth building a life around. That inner joy you experience when you are who you're meant to be and where you're meant to be. Those moments when that still small voice of God, you can hear it and feel it and know it, that it is beckoning you to live and move and have your being in connection with God and self. Well, Herod has 1,000 different faces, and Herod is very much still alive and well today. Herod is alive in anyone or anything that leads you away from those moments when you feel that overwhelming sense of joy that God wants you to have. Any of those moments that lead you away from being who you really and truly are and where you really and truly want to be. And I think that one of our challenges is to trust and believe that any fear we have, any fear of the Herods that we experience in our life, is not worth comparing to the delight of trusting that inner experience of joy, and to trust that that joy is a gift of God, and to then move courageously and confidently towards that joy. Herod's pull is strong. We all know that. We've all experienced that. But on this day, we get to remember those stargazers following their joy. And perhaps in that, we can recognize the gift that they bring to us. What they bring is the gift of their example. It's the example of saying no to Herod and saying yes to our relationship with God, however we understand that relationship. It's the example of saying no to fear and yes to joy. It's the example of saying no to being stuck in a painful past and saying yes to a joyful present and future. It's the example of trusting your joy enough to build a life around the belief that you can experience joy. And if we can receive that gift, then out of the experience of our lives joyfully lived, we will be more fully and richly able to offer that gift to others. So my friends and I have a tradition at Epiphany, which was on Wednesday, that I shared with this community last year. Each year, we get a star that has a word on it to take with us for the year, to kind of guide us, to help us reflect on our own lives and in our relationship with God. So you were invited this morning after the service to come up and take your star for the year. They're in this bowl up here. And I'm just going to ask that you don't make fun of the cutting, because I cut out like 200 stars, and that is not my strength or my gift. So they're kind of stars. But each one of them has a word on them. And I encourage you to take time to reflect on this word throughout your year. Ponder what significance this word might have in your life and how God might be speaking to you through